Welcome to episode 2 on the journey to conscious healthcare, where we explore what it takes to consciously create longevity, happiness and fulfillment in your life and that of others. The journey to conscious healthcare looks at the healthcare industry, disability sector, and how to best navigate these areas to get the best for you and your life. I'm your host, Trevor Keane, and I'm the founder and CEO of Trevor Keane Health Services, an expert company that is known for high-quality healthcare services and transforming the healthcare industry in the disability space. This series is on the support coordinators in the disability space, called the do's and don'ts of support coordination. Today's show is sponsored by Trevor Keane Health Services. At Trevor Keane Health Services, we provide high-quality NDIS health services in the comfort of your own home. If you're interested in an easy and reliable way to navigate the NDIS and access health services, please get in touch. Today's guest backdates before the NDIS. She has extensive experience working in the disability sector from her time at the Department, Communities and Social Inclusion, where she progressed into senior and more specialised roles. After moving from the Central Allocations Unit, she moved into the NDIS in-kind unit, specialising in exploring housing. It's therefore no surprise when she took the leap of faith to go out on her own and decided to do that herself, that she specialised in exploring housing options nearly 2.5 years ago. Sian is the owner of a successful support coordination company who undertakes level 2 and 3 support coordination. Her team comprises of 15 competent support coordinators who are personable, compassionate, and very knowledgeable in that craft. Sian Williams, thank you and welcome for joining us today from your company, From Here2Home.
Hi, Trevor. Thank you for having me.
Not a worry at all. Well, let's start off. We've got a bit of an interesting question to get the ball rolling. We're going back to your childhood. So tell us in your childhood, when you were growing up, what is it that you wanted to do?
I wanted to be a psychologist and work for myself. So I do have a bachelor's degree in psychology, and here I am working for myself. So I feel like it's something that I did manage to achieve to some degree, even though I'm not practicing as a psychologist. I do sort of work with them a lot in this industry. So
absolutely. It's quite fascinating in the disability space. Psychology and psychosocial disability is a huge sort of thing. Is that sort of what sparked your interest in where you've sort of gone with your work?
It was really around why people do the things that they do. And I think my mum had a bit of an influence there as well. She's worked in disability since she was 19. And it just felt like a natural progression towards that with, the conversations that we would have at home around her experiences. She also had an interest in psychology too.
Oh, it makes a pretty natural sense. And I suppose I think it's only nice that we jump at the start. So how was it that you got started? I know I did a long intro, but I'd love to hear the story from yourself.
So I did used to work in childcare, and when I had my third child, I took some time off, and I was looking to re-enter the workforce at some stage, and things had changed in the childcare industry, so you needed to have a qualification, and I felt like if I was going to study something, it wanted to be something I was really passionate about. So that's when I actually started doing my psychology degree. And then returning to work, looking at different options. Like I mentioned before, my mum works in disability too, and suggested that I look at potentially doing something like service coordination or something similar with Disability SA, and put my application in. And my first role was in the intake and assessment team at Disability SA. So started off there and worked for a couple of years, primarily with people with autism spectrum disorder, and working alongside the psychologists when they were doing assessments for intellectual disability as well. So
it sounds like it would have been very fascinating, especially given your interest in psychology, and then obviously autism itself is a bit of a complex beast. And I think it's really fascinating that you've gone from working with pediatrics, so children, and then as time went on, you had different career opportunities sort of open up for you, if you want to say a bit more.
So obviously as the NDIS rolled out, different opportunities arose within the department as units were closing down. So the intake and assessment team did have to exit at some stage. So when that happened, I went to our central resource allocation unit and I worked on the accommodation placement panel there with a couple of others. So we had a portfolio of accommodation providers that we managed. So we were looking at supported independent living and how that would be matched to suitable people that were clients of Disability SA. And then, again, obviously that unit needed to exit. So I was approached by the in-kind services unit manager there to move across to that particular unit as a senior project officer, working with the specialist support coordinators and the support coordinators around exploring housing. And for a brief period before I transitioned over, I went to the project team for a month to assist with that transition from state government to federal government for the community housing providers and the SIL providers around how that was all going to work, basically, and supported them with utilising the Housing Hub, which some people might be familiar with, which is a little bit like realestate.com for people with disability looking for housing. And then, went to the in-kind services unit for about a year, working with the support coordinators there, just specialising in exploring housing.
You're really, I'm just sort of taking that all in. I suppose the main thing there is you're right on the cusp of it as far as early days, NDIS, the disability sector going from public funding, like block sort of funded in Disability SA into really an open market. And so a pretty unique experience. Not everyone has that sort of opportunity. Yeah,
it was. And I guess just watching how different community housing providers and SIL providers approach that transition. Some people, I guess it was a very different approach because it was more of a business approach that they needed to put their thinking caps on for that and how that was all going to work, because like you said before, it was block funded and it operated very differently. So some people work towards that quicker than others, but we all got there in the end.
Yeah, and I suppose it's all shutting down, right? So that's sort of coming to the end of the train tracks or the road, and then you started out yourself. Like, how did that all happen?
Yeah, so working for state government, people were offered some separation packages, and it was something that was a tough decision for some. But at the end of the day, we all knew that there was going to be an end to it. So I did accept that package, and I sat on the idea of potentially starting my own company for a few weeks and had a few people suggesting that I should go ahead and do it. So the school holidays finished and I just took that leap of faith and launched the company.
Yeah. Oh, it's fantastic. And it's fascinating because there's a lot of independent support coordinators that are out there and people that do take the punt. What was it like when you did that? I mean, you're taking a punt on yourself, right? I mean, you've gone from very steady, secure employment to, going out by yourself. What was that like, the upcoming sort of feelings and also that sort of transition?
I've always lived by the saying, when an opportunity presents itself, just take it and worry about it later. So I didn't really think too far ahead about what would or wouldn't happen. I had a lot of hospital contacts that I'd worked with through my previous 2 roles, and I really just started there, letting people know what I was doing, and it grew quite quickly. So it wasn't something that I planned, in 5 years' time, what is this going to look like? I didn't even necessarily have a plan to build a team, but that's the way that it developed, and I'm really glad that it did, but it wasn't something that was well thought out in that sense.
Oh, it's fascinating. I mean, we have to pick on your psychology. You've got a background in psychology. You've now got a team. Did you have a connection or thirst for creating that sort of unifying team, that sort of bonding experience, or is that just something that naturally happened by demand? Like, as in, how's that ended up happening, you growing the team out?
A little bit of both, but probably more the need to be around people a lot. So the more I was thinking about, could I do this long-term working from home alone, was definitely not something that I felt would be sustainable for me mentally and emotionally. It was just not something I think I would be enjoying in 2, 3, 4 years' time. So I definitely did want to build a team. It was quite obvious very early on that I would want to be working with others. And I'd always said, even back in the in-kind unit, that I would somehow work in hospitals because I just really enjoyed working in the hospital space. But obviously I can't sit down and have a desk space in the hospitals doing what I'm doing. So creating a team was something that quickly became apparent that is what I wanted, and the demand just naturally occurred. So it was fortunate, but I think that side of things happened first.
Well, it sounds like you're very motivated and driven, and your team now is 15 people. I mean, did you ever? I think it's 15. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
15, yep. And what are your thoughts and feelings that you have about that? That's a pretty decent sized team, right?
Yeah, I'm very proud of our team. I think that everyone brings really unique individual qualities and experiences and skills, and I definitely didn't think that it would grow to this size so quickly, but everyone works really well together as well, and we're a very supportive team who, even though it's an autonomous role, we collaborate together a lot, and it's a very supportive environment. So I think that I hope people really enjoy working where they do.
Oh, that's awesome. I think you've raised a few really valid points. I'm in touch with quite a lot of support coordinators, and this whole feeling of being isolated and alone, or feeling like they don't really know what they're doing, is very common. Like, as in, how have you navigated that? And clearly you've made some processes, or you've got some training in place. I'm assuming people have learnt from you. You didn't just get really well-established support coordinators, right? It's very new. So how did you go along that journey?
So we do have a training day that we get all coordinators to do before they even start with us. And then there was a very strong emphasis and need, obviously, that we identified around making sure that the support was ongoing. It's not something that we want to throw people in the deep end and try and work that out themselves. So we have our team manager, Erica Colmer. So she's very supportive of the team as well, and they can ask her questions at any time. We have regular supervision sessions, so each person gets a one-on-one with either myself or Erica around their caseload and any complexities or barriers they might be facing. And then we have a Q&A session every month where support coordinators can ask me any questions in a forum. It's a video meeting, and they're open to ask, if they want to go over a process or something like that again. But that ongoing support is really important to me, making sure that the coordinators don't feel isolated and they do have someone that they can go to. And we also focus not just on how they're managing their work with the clients in terms of, do they know what they're doing, but also how are they feeling with their own caseload, and they're not at risk of burnout, or they're not feeling overwhelmed. And so that's also just as much a priority as the actual service delivery. Yeah.
Well, that's really fascinating. What I'm hearing come through on that, and we're getting back to psychology, is it's this theme of psychological safety is what I'm hearing. It's a real safe space to show up and maybe fall on your face a few times, have some wins, but fundamentally you're in a very supported environment and everyone can work and collaborate together. Is that sort of happen, once again by choice, or is that, have I described that right? Yeah,
no, that's a very conscious decision that I've made, that I want to make sure that support coordinators do feel safe and that they can make mistakes and just own it, and that's okay. There's no judgment, but we just want to support and work through and make sure that, they feel comfortable being able to share their vulnerabilities. And, sometimes that's not even necessarily work related. Sometimes it can be something personal that's happening in their life, and therefore their work might feel like it's more challenging than it would be if they weren't facing those personal challenges at home. So it's creating that safe space so that they can share whatever it might be that they're facing at the time.
Well, it's really wonderful, and I think it leads very nicely onto a question which is very, very well listened to, I'm sure, in regards to how would you suggest that support coordinators handle the stresses and the constant obstacles that are thrown their way and also look after themselves? So very much on this theme of self-care.
Yeah, so resilience is something that I talk to the coordinators a bit about because it's not something that's necessarily, it's not a personality trait. You're not born with it. It's something you can develop and you can get better at it. So the strategies, I guess, that we've talked about in helping them to develop their resilience is around having that opportunity and feeling like they're able to come to myself or Erica or even another colleague around debriefing if they've had, an upsetting phone call or they're just finding something particularly difficult, that they can talk about it and have that opportunity to share. Obviously being able to separate work from personal life too. So not taking that home. I think that coordinators, it does draw people who usually do have that empathetic, compassionate nature. So it can be hard to really switch off and have that personal time as well. So finding something, whatever that might be, and everybody's different. Everyone has different things that help them cope with life. For some people, it might be going out for dinner with all their friends and just having an event. For someone else, it might be being completely alone and just having a bath for an hour. So it's about self-reflection and identifying what it is that works for you to have that downtime.
Well, that's very inspirational. And dare I say it, I've been banging on about this for a while, but I'm trying to make personal development and self-awareness become sexy. I don't think it's a sexy topic, but I tell you, it makes a huge difference in your life if you actually do take that on and take that time out for yourself. I'm quite intrigued as far as if you've had a few people that have inspired you on your journey. I'd love to know if any key people and sort of what influence that they've had on you in your life.
Well, just going back to the question around childhood, obviously my mum has had a big influence. She's worked in the disability sector since she was 19, and she was a regional manager for Disability SA, so I quite often would hear her down the hallway when I was at work, which was a little strange sometimes. But, we would share lots of stories and, she would tell me stories from when she was 19, 20 working at Strathmont that were quite inspiring about the changes that she was able to make to people's lives. And the other person I would say is Kerry Bryan. So she was a principal social worker for the South Australian public hospitals. I worked with Kerry a lot in my previous couple of roles at state government. And she was just someone that I felt was really approachable, and we worked together really well. And she was just quite complimentary, which kind of made me feel like I could probably do this. Just sometimes you need someone in your corner backing you on. So, yeah. Oh,
it sounds like they're very much role models, and have a look at the path that you've paved forward. They've obviously given you an opportunity and inspired you, but I think you've gone on with it and done fantastic in that space. Whilst we're on the good news stories, I'd love to hear if you've got some form of a case study or we have a lot of negative news, right? Have you got anything good to share for us as far as what's a great story that's happened that you've been able to play a role in?
We did not very long ago have a hospital patient who was referred to us. He had been homeless for over 10 years, living in his car, and really needed a house of his own. And he was discharged into a friend's property, which was really unsuitable. And I think sometimes, being in that situation, it can make people feel like they're a bit of a burden. And the situation had changed, so he really couldn't stay there. The family dynamic had changed. So one of our specialist support coordinators worked really, really hard and managed to get him a house on his own. Being independent was really, really important to him. He didn't want to share with somebody else. And he really didn't need a lot of support in the home. He liked to do as much as possible independently, and she facilitated that to happen. So she said that the conversation when he'd moved, she gave him a call and said that he was a completely different person. She could just hear the happiness in his voice, and she was quite excited for him. So,
oh, it's amazing. I can hear how proud you are personally as well, and I think really giving that dignity back as well. I think
absolutely.
Look, you don't know how close you individually are to being homeless yourself, and fundamentally, if we can do anything to try and put the foot in the right direction, help people, I think that's a fantastic thing.
Yep.
Yeah, well, on that as well, I think this leads in really well as far as where your area of expertise is, and I don't think too many people would contest that. So whilst we're on the topic of moving into housing and stuff like that, I'd love to hear about the key components in regards to exploring housing options, so EHO. What helps you get a good report, and what's involved that's, the key instruments?
What's involved in the key instruments would be knowing the process, and anyone working with NDIS knows that can change from time to time. So the process did change not that long ago. Just being familiar with what is the requirement from NDIS in getting things approved. In terms of getting a good report, that really comes down to selecting a good therapist. So choosing a therapist that is familiar with exploring housing options and what the NDIS terminology is around all of that and what they're looking for. So, and covering all the bases, including the housing side of things, not just the person's functioning and, how that relates to the house that they would need.
Yeah, and whilst we're still talking on that, I mean, level 3 support coordinators doing EHOs, or who's sort of doing the EHOs? I know the work's sort of getting divvied up and handballs are going left, right and centre. Forgive me for using a football quote. But,
so it did start off initially that only the specialist support coordinators were able to deliver the exploring housing options, but that has been broadened to level 2 support coordinators now. So my advice is just, again, going back to your original question and just familiarising themselves with what the process is, what do NDIS actually require, and a lot of it is evidence-based. So making sure that you do select a good OT who does have good knowledge of the exploring housing side of things.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And whilst we're sort of talking about getting that aspect of it right, I think really handing it over to support coordinators here, the very topical question of billable hours, it's talked about widely. I'm really interested as far as the do's and don'ts, and have you got any particular strategies that you use? As I know some do it with ease and some find it really challenging. Burnout's high, all this stuff. I mean, any tips and tricks, or I'd love to just hear from your experience, please.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Some people struggle with it and some people find it much, much easier. My advice is around being very organised. So that definitely helps. One of the strategies that we suggest to our support coordinators is working in blocks. So rather than, hopping from one client to the next, actually sitting down and just working on one client for whatever period of time to get those things done that you need to. We suggest to our coordinators that they use a triaging system. So at the start of each week, writing down all your clients and all the follow-up things that need to be done, and then basically triaging it. So what's the most critical that really can't wait? And working in blocks. So getting what needs to be done for that particular person before you actually move on to the next. And sometimes that's easier said than done. You might get a phone call in the middle of working on somebody else, or it can be a little bit hard to filter through the emails who relates to what. But being just really organised can help build those billable hours.
So, Sian, I'd love to know, in regards to support coordinators, where do they go wrong? We've heard about the tips and tricks of what to do. Where do some go wrong? And I'd love to hear from your experience. You've seen it a lot, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I think one of the main things would be just not knowing the NDIS processes or what's actually required from NDIS, and making sure that they've got all the evidence that NDIS need. Another thing which might seem silly, but it's crucial, is just having compassion, being able to put themselves in that person's shoes and seeing how, things from their perspective. So, whatever situation that might be. So it also helps not personalize things if perhaps someone is experiencing something negative and they're the person that is receiving that feedback, not to personalize it and making sure that, it's not about them. It's just that that's their experience.
Oh, I totally get that. And I suppose in regards to providing a little bit more help and assistance, where do you go for information? How do you keep informed? The NDIS changes day in, day out. Where do you go for your information? What's reputable? Or I'd love to hear.
So obviously the NDIS website is helpful and it's updated regularly. Word of mouth is big. Even just within our team, we do, share a lot of information if we hear an update on something that is relevant to everybody. Working with other people in the industry, you just, the conversations do come up and you share information with others. I would say, or even just social media, sometimes that can be helpful with things that I see in forums. There's a lot of support coordinator forums available on things like Facebook that help people not just stay up to date, but even with just general questions that they might be stuck on and where to go.
Oh, that's perfect. I think it's really good to have avenues to reach out to. I think let's get a little bit more into the personal experience. What's a typical day look like for you?
Oh, there is no typical day, Trevor. Lots of meetings. Like I was saying before, we do provide a lot of support to our support coordinators, particularly if they're new. So sometimes that does include me going along to meetings to ensure that they're supported and they're not just thrown in the deep end, and I can be there to answer questions they might not know how to answer just yet. So sometimes I might do that. Sometimes it's just coming out, meeting other providers like yourself, understanding what services they offer and how they operate and whether their company values align with ours. Are they someone that we want to work with? I do, speak to a lot of new referrals that come through. So whether that's someone in the community or the NDIS themselves. So I'm quite often the point of initial contact that people have when they ring through to us to be able to explain our service. And I speak to our coordinators on a regular basis too if they've got, questions or advice that they're looking for.
Oh, that's perfect. I'd love to know a little bit. I don't know if you've thought this far ahead, but what does the future hold from here to home? Where's the business headed? Have you got much of a plan? I know you said you'd sort of landed into it, but now you're 15 people deep, and you've got decisions to make, I think.
I'm not great at planning too far ahead, which I think is touched on at the start, how we all started. So we have just grown quite organically, really. It's not something that I've planned too much. At the moment, we've got probably a team and a half, and, looking to complete that second team to be able to service different areas of Adelaide as well, not just, one region. And potentially looking at country might be an option for us too. I know that there's a big demand for the country, and unfortunately they don't have the same resources and services out there that the Adelaide Metro does have. So that's something that we may consider in the future. But at this stage, it's just going along as it is.
Oh, so there's nothing wrong with that. I think we've come to that time. I've got a burning last question to ask you. So let's pretend it's 20 years into the future and we've achieved success in the disability sector. What does it look like? What does it feel like? Paint me a picture.
I think seeing people with disability living their best life, living as independently as possible, whatever that means to them, and a greater understanding of it within the community, because I think there's a lot of people that just probably don't understand it enough. There's so many different disability types, and it all comes with different different barriers that they might be facing. So just having that knowledge and understanding and acceptance and, that equality, I guess, to include everybody into everything.
Oh, I think that sounds amazing. I think from knowing a few family members that have got disabilities themselves and just seeing how they can not get given the same opportunities, I think it'd be great that, if we do get there in 20 years' time and see that sort of unfold. So we've been talking to Sian Williams, who is the owner of a thriving company in the NDIS space called From Here2Home. Sian, where can we go to learn more about what you do?
We do have a website at www.fromhere2home.com.au, and that's with the number 2. A lot of people put the TO, but it's number 2. Or they can just call us on 0435 668 466. And I believe we're also on the NDIS provider list as well, so we can be found on there as well, being a registered NDIS provider.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Trevor.